then. And for them, 9/11 is just something of the history. Now, I do remember, and it's very, very, very interesting how Israeli perceive news like this, unlike people in North America. Listen to this story. I did carpool. You know, I have, Baruch Hashem, 8 kids, so most of my life, until they left home, I was very busy with carpooling. I remember I was standing on the red light on Finch and Bathurst on my way to Etzchaim. Then it was Etzchaim. I think now it's a new school, a different school. And I hear that a plane hit one of the tower of the Trade Center. And apparently it's an accident. I call my wife. I say, listen, there was a terror attack in the middle of New York, like without thinking too much. Because for me, it was every time that I went to the news, I knew about terror attacks in Israel. And like airplane hit the Trade Center, this must be a terror attack. I dropped my kids in Etzchaim. I went back. We live in the area of Bathurst and Shepherd. I ran to the house, opened the television, and as we watch what happened, and we see like the beginning of the smoke, it was like 20 minutes after the beginning of the smoke, in front of our eyes, the second plane hit the second tower. It's in front of our house. I understood what's going on. I was at the time a principal in Orchaim. This was, I think the year started on September 6 or maybe 7 even. And I brought like the TV, the old TVs, you know, not the flat one of today, to the center. And I told the teachers, I want the students to see what's happening. First of all, I knew that it's going to be big, and I didn't know how big it was. It was before the towers collapsed. And parents started to come and to take their kids. Everyone thought that like it's going to hit also here in Canada. Yeah, so this is a day to remember. But I think that if we remember it, we also should remember the sacrifice of so many people who try to save other people's life, and hundreds of firefighters and policemen. So it was a day of darkness, but it was also a day of heroism.
Which we can apply to October 7th as well.
I agree. There are many lessons that can be learned. And I would say for many Americans, it was the first time that they saw anything like this. Unfortunately, I said it very, very unfortunately, for a person who came from Israel who fight for its life every day of its existence, it wasn't something new. And I knew that the Jewish people can contribute something of how to deal with a tragedy like this.
You know, when I was running Via Hafta at that time, it's a Jewish humanitarian organization that I started. I've spoken about it before. And I remember telling my staff that we need to leave the office. And we all went downstairs together. We went about 2 blocks away. And I talked to them about what was going on, and nothing was clear yet. But I said, everybody needs to go home. And I will call you when it's time to come back. But I remember thinking at that time, similarly on October 7th, and quite frankly, most days thereafter, how central we, the Jewish people, are to world events, in particular like that. And I've been thinking extensively about that, about we are such a small people. I mean, officially, we're only 15 million people in the world or thereabouts. Yet what happens to us or because of us is so dramatic in nature that we have to be very cognizant of that. We have to be very, very aware of it. To ask ourselves, who are we, the Jewish people, that the world is influenced so much by what we do and who we are?
And I think quite the same about Medinat Israel. I think that everything that is going in Israel, and listen, not everything is perfect, but the way to deal with many crises, with many issues that troubling Israel will be tomorrow troubling the Western civilization this way or another. and Israel is actually making presidents, something that is going to be a way, or I would say the meter bar, to how other people and how other nations and countries are going to fight terrorism, crises, diversity, whatever it is. Israel experience is going to serve as something very valuable in the world.
No doubt, no doubt. And I think one of the things that we need to take away from this shiur, this class, this podcast, and other ones that you listen to, and just to watch the development of our people, is the pride that we need to have as Jews, because we're a very special people. We really are. And that doesn't mean that other people aren't special as well. But in the way that we sort of glitter, that we illuminate our people, our neighborhood, the world, it's really, really something special. And I am feeling more pride about being Jewish than ever before. And I think it's important that we talk about that as well.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, the show is called Parsha and Prose. Before I start our podcast, I just want to say that the value of Jewish-based learning and thought is very important to us, to you, to our community. Parsha and Prose is a podcast that is generating very large numbers, and my other podcast too. Thank God I have close to 3,000 subscribers. Now, these podcasts, they need to be supported through financial contributions. Just like NPR or like Jazz FM here in Toronto. So if you think you'd like to be a supporter of my podcast or our show, please reach out to me, and you can do so at avram.rosensweig@gmail.com. With that in mind, I would like to introduce you to one of my current proud sponsors, the Professional Center. And the Professional Center is a premier co-working space at 120 Adelaide, where more is the standard, the industry leader since 1987. TPC offers private and team offices, fully equipped meeting rooms, collaborative workspaces, premium amenities, and exceptional hospitality. Book a day, a week, however long you need. Escape work from home distraction and discover more privacy, more productivity, and more community at TPC. And for more information, visit theprofessionalcenter.com. Now, Rabbi, we are doing this week Parshat Ki Tetze. We're learning it, we're studying it, and we are doing it through the lens of a classic book, which is called A Farewell to Arms, right?
By Hemingway. And it's one of the books that I think passed its way to his way to the Nobel Prize and the Pulitzer Prize. A very important writer. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about it later. And this book in particular considered to be maybe the most famous, if not the best, book written about the war of the First World War.
Does it bother you at all when you read his books or this book that he killed himself?
I always think about it, and listen, I'm not a psychologist, but if you read carefully this book, I think you will get some hints why he killed himself when he was, I think, 61, 62, 63.
Yeah.
And I think, of course, when you read the book, you think about this fact every page that you read. And I will tell you why I think you could predict something like this. And I would say it very briefly now. Maybe later we are going to go through quotes. The book is very rich in description of the landscape, of the mountains of Italy, of how people react to their injuries, and so on and so on. But it's very dull in terms of emotions, which characterizes, by the way, the writing of Hemingway. He's a great writer, but we are going to talk about his special way that he actually was the precursor of the modern writing, which is very different from the Russian one that we discussed a few times, in terms of going into the little details of emotion and thinking and so on. You will not find it in Hemingway. You will find fantastic descriptions of many, many things, but when it goes to the soul, dry, nothing. And I would say that a person who lost like the meaning of life, although he actually had life to the fullest, there is something when people like lack emotions, like sharing their thoughts, their inner thoughts. What does it tell you? They are very lonely. They are very lonely. They don't really communicate with other people, maybe only on the surface. So again, in a hindsight, I would say that you could see some hints in even in this book
Very interesting.
to what is coming later.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. I'd never thought about that. By the way, just as an addendum, last week we talked a little bit about authors and composers who have not a very nice background, like Wagner. We talked about that last week, and I asked you if you do listen to Wagner. You said you do with guilt. So this week I decided I was going to listen to Wagner a little bit, and it was very interesting as I had a very similar feeling to you. And while I listened to it and I saw what you were talking about, how brilliant he was, therefore the seductivity of listening to him, at some point in time, I just had to stop because I remembered what it is that he had done with his gift. Right.
And his music is very overwhelming, very overwhelming. And by the way, you have to understand, like Wagner lived way before the Holocaust happened, right? He lived in the 19th century, in the beginning of 19th century. However, he wrote a very anti-Semitic book where he spoke about Jewish composers like Mendelssohn, and he spoke about the sweetness of Jewish music and how it's going actually against nature. Even in music, he saw the kindness of the Jewish people, something that he considered a blemish, not something to be proud of.
Yes.
And um, to me, it's very much like focusing on the nature power, on the very animalistic powers of creation, and not giving enough space to religious thoughts, to kindness, to thinking, to care. And so you cannot blame the music for the brutal nature of the German soldiers or SS, but it inspired it. This same vision of the world, a world which is just like material and power, and suppress anything that is going down. This is exactly the opposite of Jewish life and Jewish thought.
Yeah, I find those both those points are fascinating, and to think about what you're saying about Hemingway, that he was void of emotions, or at least not did not have well developed emotions. His father was a very brutal guy, and his father committed suicide as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, his father killed himself as well with a shotgun, I believe, with a pistol. So sometimes the apple doesn't fall far in that way as well.
Listen, and
Late,
this is a shame because you know that Hemingway had a chapter of his life here in Toronto, our Toronto.
yeah,
Can you believe it?
yeah, he worked for the Toronto Telegram, the newspaper,
Yeah, Toronto, I think it was then Daily Star.
something
I
like that.
once went to downtown and actually they have a little library or museum. And yeah, it's, by the way, you should know, he lived on Butter Street. Do you believe it? On
Yeah.
1599 Butter Street. Actually, listen, before the podcast, I said, wow, this would be nice if I go to his apartment and I'm doing but I'm working here in chat. I did not have time for this, but it could be cool. You have to admit it.
How did you know where he lived?
Because once I heard, someone told me, I live next to, I think, Beit Tzedek, or that Hemingway just lived across the street. I
No
said,
kidding, eh?
really? I never knew that he's in Toronto. He said, yeah, you
Very
will
cool.
see like the yellow building. He lived there, and actually next to his apartment, there is a plaque. So it's not, by the way, then I learned a little bit more that he had a house, that the person who brought him to Toronto from Chicago, I believe, he lived in his house, and it was like two houses from the Casa Loma. So he was in Toronto, and many people believe that, like his position in the Toronto Star, which he hated, by the way, and that's why he did not stay here in Toronto, um, eh, helped him to develop this style of being on the verge between literature and journalism and newspaper. So it's very, very interesting. Very interesting. You know, it reminds me, sometimes I like to go next to these houses. Maybe I will catch some of the energies there.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
when I go to New York, I love to go to 86 and West Park. My son used to live not far away, and in the building there on the corner, Rachmaninov, which is like one of the most admired composers of the 19th century and the 20th century, lived. And like I can sometimes hear like the second concert of Rachmaninoff, like through the walls. I think they captured something, and it is inspiring.
You have a wonderful imagination, Rabbi.
No, I do hear it. No, yeah, it's in
No,
my
you have a
imagination.
terrific imagination. But do you feel the same way about going to righteous men's kevers, plots,
So
cemetery?
you see, I'm a Cohen.
Okay,
I don't go to gravesides.
great. Good.
But yes, actually, when I go in Yerushalayim, and I had in this summer, I went to Jerusalem, and actually we had one of our podcasts there. I went to a place that is called Nachlaot. It's just across the street from Ben Yehuda, and it's the opposite of everything of Ben Yehuda, which is very vibrant place. Nachlaot is a very quiet, silent, I would say. And in one of the houses there lived a very famous righteous person by the name Aryeh Levin.
Mhm.
And I had the same feeling. I go next to the place that, like, he breathed. He saw the same sights. He saw the same walls. Maybe I will be inspired. But you know what? I came back to Toronto. I don't think I took too much of his personality, unfortunately.
I remember when I was in yeshiva in Sanhedria, I went to the Sanhedria tombs where many of the great writers of the Talmud were buried, and afterwards too. And I would sit there and I would close my eyes and I would consider the spirits that were hovering around me. And I would similarly, as you do, I would try to take that energy out of it, something that I could just connect to. And I think very often, if you're very meditative in nature, that you can kind of go there and think about these people, who they were, what they contributed to our people, what they contributed to the world. It's fascinating.
You want to hear an amazing story that happened to me? You can
Yeah.
cut it afterwards from the podcast if you want, but it's really like, wow story. Listen to this. When I was in the army, I was in a parachuting unit. And one night we were around Bethlehem in a place that is called Beit Sahur, and I had a shift between, I think, 2 o'clock to 6 a.m., 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And it's dark and lonely, and I sit there with my rifle, towards an unknown target, because you don't see much and you don't know, you just have to be ready. And I see that with my shoe, the red shoe of the parachuter, is like something is smooth under my leg. And I look at it and I see that it looks like a tombstone or something. And okay, I'm a soldier. You have to stay there. You cannot go, even though I'm a Kohen normally. And I come closer and I see the following inscription: Ponitman, here lay Mar Baravashi, one of the greatest sages of the Talmud. Like, no one, apparently, there are people who are marking graves with traditions. And in the middle of the night, I'm a soldier, and I just, on the grave of Mar Baravashi, one of the greatest Amoraim in the Talmud. How crazy can this be? Like, in the morning, I called people and I said, do you know where we are? We are in a holy site, like
Yeah.
one of the greatest sages that I learned in his Torah. It was with me last night, and the people look at me and they think I'm a Shiganer, but I wasn't. I was next to his grave for a complete night. No one knew about it. And actually, years later, when I told someone, he said, "Oh, you were next to Bethlehem. I know exactly where his grave is." So this is a person from 1800 years ago. How amazing is this one?
Do you think there's a sign in that? Is that from God?
There was.
No. A sign to you.
What do you mean? What?
You do take out of that this is hashgacha, that there's something here for you to learn, something for you to take forward.
I believe so. I do believe so. Um, I can't explain it. I don't know what the message is, but it was very meaningful. Listen, I'm sure that any other soldier in my unit would be there and he wouldn't know even what is it. But for me, it was like bridging, bridging hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And like the person that I learn his Torah is like next to me. Okay, he's not alive, but actually, you know what? His Torah is alive. Isn't it more important?
That's wonderful. Great story. I won't edit that out. I like it. But ladies and gentlemen, today we're studying Ki Tetze, which is in the Sefer Devarim or Deuteronomy. We're coming very close to the end of this cycle of the 5 books of Moses. In the Torah portion of Ki Tetze, which spans Deuteronomy 21:10 to 25:19, a diverse array of laws and ethical guidelines are presented reflecting the complexity of social and moral life in ancient Israel and amongst the Jewish people. The portion addresses various aspects of daily life, including the treatment of prisoners of war, the rights of women, and the responsibilities of community in upholding justice. Among the key themes are the principle of humane treatment and social responsibility as seen in laws concerning the protection of the vulnerable, such as the prohibition against taking a millstone as a pledge and care for orphans and widows. Additionally, Ki Tetze emphasizes personal integrity and ethical behavior, outlining laws against deceit and ensuring fairness in business practices. The portion serves as a foundation for fostering a just and compassionate society, intertwining legal mandates with moral imperatives. Today, we are also studying Farwell to Arms. The Farwell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway is a poignant novel set against the backdrop of World War I. It is written once again by Ernest Hemingway and first published in 1929. The novel reflects Hemingway's experiences and observations from his own time as an ambulance driver during World War I. The story follows Lieutenant Frederick Henry, an American ambulance driver in the Italian Army, who falls in love with Catherine Barclay, a British nurse. Their romance develops amidst the chaos and disillusionment of the war, offering a stark contrast to the brutality surrounding them. As the war progresses, Frederick is severely wounded and sent to recover in a hospital in Milan, where his relationship with Catherine deepens. Their love is tested by harsh realities of the war and the uncertainty of their future. After his recovery, Frederick returns to the front, only to face more disillusionment and despair. These are obviously 2 fascinating pieces. Rabbi, I'm just always curious as to why you choose particular novels to compare to a parsha.
Here it was actually quite easy because you might think that war and love and romance are completely at the opposite. And here the Torah starts a parsha about a war, a Jewish war. A person is going to a war, maybe to extend the land of Israel, maybe to protect a place in Israel. And this guy fall in love with a girl, a beautiful girl from the enemy. And this book of Hemingway is not dealing with falling in love with your enemy, but what happened to people in war, why they are so susceptible and vulnerable, and actually they might fall in love in war more than regular times. So I thought to talk a little bit about it. And then one more thing, which I find very, very important. Listen, Hemingway is known for his minimalistic style of writing. And you know, you talked to me many times about the Midrash and about why do we need a Midrash, something to add on the Torah. And it came to my mind that if I want to use any book or any new style to explain the Midrash, I would use Hemingway. His writing sometimes leave you with a feeling that, okay, wait a second, what really happened here? For example, I'll give you one simple example, but it's like the entire book is dotted with it. It's actually, this book has like 5 different books. So in one episode, Catherine asked Frederick, "Do you love me?" And he says, "Sure." Now, I already interpreted the word "sure" because I said it like with in affirmative way, like sure. But in the book, it doesn't say sure. It can be sure. It can be sure. So Hemingway write it, right? But you don't know exactly. Let me ask you, what is your interpretation to the word sure? She asked him something very important for her. She want to develop relationship, and she asked him, like, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Sure." How do you understand this answer?
So I don't have a definitive answer for that, but what I will tell you is in today's day and age where we're ensconced in texting and emailing and so on, I think one of the perils or one of the challenges to it is that a person can respond with a word, and because you don't have the inflection in it, you don't hear what their intention is. Very often it's misinterpreted. I had that exact same thing last night. I was talking to a Filipino friend of mine who came over and cleaned my place, and she told me that she left my laundry on the dryer. And I said, "Why did you leave it in the dryer?" She said, "Well, it wasn't finished yet." "Why didn't you bring it to the apartment?" She says, "Well, I was drying it." And then I realized, you know what? She meant in the dryer, right? But that was sort of a cultural difference.
But
But
you
I
see,
understand
here
what you're
it's
saying.
even more because you have the answer and you can say, okay, he said that just to brush her off. Okay, yeah, I will tell you what you want to hear, and you can say like, oh, of course, like he just repeat
Right.
and with, but when Hemingway wrote this way, he knew that he leave you to decide what it was. He does not have to write it. If it would be Tolstoy, for example, or Dostoevsky or any Russian writer, you will get there like sentences describing his emotion in little details, not by Hemingway. Sure. And you will understand what sure means. And to me, many, many times, it reminds me the style of the Torah. Listen, the first parsha that we are going to discuss is known as the parsha of Yefat Toar. As I say, a Jewish soldier must be maybe a yeshiva guy who goes to the war, and he see the beautiful girl of the enemy. Maybe they don't have anything in common, not maybe even a language, who knows? He fall in love with her, and he want to marry her. Now, this is a like crazy story. But you know what? Even in the Torah, the interesting thing is no emotions. The only emotion that appears is v'chashakta ba. You will have a desire, which, by the way, it's a very tricky word because it doesn't talk so much about love, romance, desire, which is something very different. So you have here a story about a boy going to a war, everything that he went through, his family that he left behind, maybe his girlfriend who left behind. You have a whole story about a captive, a beautiful girl with a family. And the Torah does not say a word about the emotion. There is a beautiful description, what did happen, what are the laws, what he has to do next, but nothing about emotions. And this reminds me, that's exactly Hemingway, a writer who is very rich about many aspects of writing, but when it comes to emotion, silence, nothing. He leaves it to you. By the way, it became this style of Hemingway became something that is known as the iceberg style or the theory of iceberg. Namely, you just expose the tip of the story to the reader, but 90% of it are underwater. You don't see it. You have to figure it out. And
But
to
by the
me,
way, it's true what you're saying that it doesn't show the emotions or the feelings of the soldier, but it does discuss the woman's feelings.
right, but in a very shallow way. Again, it's not Tolstoy that is going to tell you the feeling and how it's changing over time. No, she loved him. By the way, it's very technical because you know that she lost already someone who she loved and he loved her, and but you don't go to too many details. It's a very flat story. By the way, I want to tell you this is really interesting because when I took the book before we started to discuss, I just realized that the landscape in Italy is exactly the place that I visited last time. I actually went through my pictures in the cell phone, and these are the places that he describes. And indeed, when we went to Italy, they have like museum to the history of the World War, the First World War everywhere, especially in the mountainous area where the Austrian came from the north. For no well-known reasons, they are not so proud about like the Second World War, and they don't have too many museums about this one because they cooperated with Hitler. But they are very, very like very deep with their emotions regarding the First World War, which was unbelievable thing. When we were on the Marmolada mountain, there they have a beautiful a museum to show every aspect of their life of the soldiers, and I understood so much better the book with these like pictures in mind how difficult it was, the cold, the trenches, the unbelievably steep mountains, and people has to walk there and to protect the passes from the invasion of the Austrians and the Germans. Very interesting. So I relived it when I read the story.
I'd like to see those pictures, by the way. But Rabbi, when the Torah talks about the soldier bringing home this woman, and that he has to go through a whole process of ensuring that he loves her, she has to basically turn very ugly to him, and that is why. That's to ensure that the emotions are there, that the real love is there.
Um, Listen, the Torah don't talk too much about love, and I think that love, as we described it this day, is heavily influenced by Disney or Hollywood movies. In the old times, I think it was more like creating the foundation for a family. And if you love your wife and she loves you, this is a bonus, but completely unnecessary. It's a phenomenon that started, I believe, like maybe in the beginning of the 19th century, that really people choose their spouses upon love. I don't think it was in the entire world. Like, you don't have to be Victorian for this. So the parents are choosing your spouse. Listen, the more people became free and mobile from one place to another, love which is a great priority, just took over the arranged marriage.
What I
Um,
what I was thinking was she has to shave her head and let her nails grow out, because even if he has feelings for her, then you know it's not just a physical thing.
it's very, very true. So here is an interesting question. I would even ask our listeners, what do they think? Is it that the Torah want to coming down, maybe to make sure that it's out of love, which we might suspect altogether because the description is Yefat Toar. It's a love from first glance, which many times has nothing to do with the character of the person you meet. She just have a beautiful smile and beautiful hair, and she's gorgeous. So this might be one reason. The other one is that actually the Torah is completely against the whole idea of marrying someone that is so remote and so foreign to your culture. And the Torah give nature, to cool him down, to see her not so beautiful, and to ask himself, is this is really the girl you want to live your life with? So I'm not sure exactly what it might be that the Torah wanted this and that, but we also have to take into account that the Torah said, okay, relationships are important. Once you get into this relationship, maybe I don't like it, but I want you to develop like proper and dignified and to do it with integrity, and therefore you give her some time to recover from the emotional terrible experience that she went through. Maybe she lost family, maybe she saw like death in front of her eyes and have all kind of post-trauma things. So give her a month to be with herself. You are going to wait for a month, and then you will reassess the whole situation. And if you still like her, maybe there is something over there. But the Torah want to make sure that you don't just use or misuse your power just because you took her as a captive. The Torah wanted to be real relationship. So it's like binary of, or you are going to be deterred by her and to send her back home, or you are going to love her, to continue to love her, to live with her, but in a proper and dignified way.
Mm-hmm. And the Torah says at the end of the sugya, of this issue, it says, but it shall be that if you do not desire her, then you shall send her on her own, but you may not sell her for money. You shall not enslave her, because you have afflicted her. So what is God trying to tell us about his expectations of our own behavior?
I think it's about dignity. I think it's about the tzelem Elokim in every person, like the image of God that every person has. And we see too many times, even these days, that people, once they don't like something, they disdain it. They like just throw it away. And the Torah is very afraid of it because you can do it. This lady, no one is going to like scream on you or to take you to the court because she's the dirt of earth, like she's a captive from a different nation. No one cares about her. But the Torah demands you to treat her as a human being, as a person who was created with Tzelem Elokim, no matter what.
And you cannot enslave her, and you need to return her.
Right. And let me tell you, this is such a chidush. This is such an innovating concept because, especially at the time when the Torah was given, this was just part of your property. You had a horse, you had a donkey, you have a piece of land, and you had some captives. This is quite normal. And who talks about like human rights this time? No one was talking about it. Now, I want you to think about it. The end of the Parsha is talking about destroying Amalek. And you might ask yourself, what is so bad about Amalek? So let me tell you, because we don't have time to develop this idea. But Amalek was a nation that their parnasa, their livelihood was to take, afterwards, they collected the captives and they sold them all over in the markets of Egypt, in the markets of Turkey, in the markets of Syria. They were just property. And people forget about their humanity. They were just a cheap labor that the Amalekites made money over. And therefore, you can see in the Tanakh many, many times the Amalekites appeared at the end of the war. Why? They collected the captives and they had their trading all over. And the Torah despised this idea of people who make money out of the misery of other people that the Torah say destroy them. Destroy them. Because this is the most evil thing. A lack of recognition of the image of God in every human being and sell him like a property. People like this should not exist in the world. The Torah is very clear about it.
Just to bounce forward a little bit. And by the way, when you speak about that, we should be very cognizant of the human, trade that's going on today, especially of women and girls. And it's extremely tragic and it's very ubiquitous. So in terms of Tikkun Olam, we should be very conscious of that. And if we can do anything about it, then we should. Talking about the Amalekis, by the same token, the Torah says in 23:4 that you shall not enter that the Moabites, the Ammonites, should not enter the congregation of Hashem. And then shortly afterwards, it says that you shall not reject an Edomite, for he is your brother, and you shall not reject an Egyptian, for you are a sojourner in his land. I was very curious, and I want to make sure to ask you this. I hear what you're saying about the Amalekis. They're awful people, terrible people, and they did awful things. And here's a good example. But when we talk about slavery in Egypt, there's examples given in the Midrash of the Egyptians using Jewish children for the bricks, the mortar. What's the difference between the two? One we embrace, one we disdain.
Listen, superpowers, and at the time we are talking about Egypt, they misuse their power, they enslave people. When maybe one day we will learn the beautiful poem of Pushkin about building St. Petersburg, because to me it's like a biblical text, honestly, and which tells you that no matter who is the ruler, his name is Peter, or his name is Paro, or his name is whatever it is, people use their power. And I think the story about babies as bricks, I don't know if this is obviously the midrash. I don't know if indeed anybody used human bodies as bricks, but it tells you that the foundation of the magnificent building of Egypt, don't just see the pyramids and say, wow, this is like a world wonder, or don't see the beautiful places all over the world and just say, wow, what an architecture. Because you know what? The bricks are the babies, namely, even if it was not real babies, but it came with the cost of human life. It came with the cost of babies who were never born because their parents were so tired and exhausted and could not bring them to the world. So I take this midrash in a more spiritual way,
Mhm.
because I don't think that any builder will use any human body to, just for the wall, but it might be even more than that, because think about the freedom that were taken from people. So you don't need a real baby there, but if you have this imagination that you spoke about, and yes, I think the midrash developed my imagination to see things. I don't have to see them in front of my eyes in order to understand them. When you see the wonders of Egypt, you should know inside inside the walls of Egypt, there are Jewish babies that were never born or were not getting the father and the mother that they needed, and therefore they died. That's, I think, what our sages really meant when they say that, they threw them into it. But I want to go to your question. So, empire always misused their power to enslave others. That's not the question. But listen, they did not sell the people. Actually, even if you had a slave, you appreciate he's human, he's capable of working. Sometimes you even taught him like to do more sophisticated work. Of course, it's a terrible thing. But to trade like it was your a car dealership, so instead of car dealership, you have like a human dealership. That's like how lower you can get from here. Nothing. This is the lowest point on earth, and the Torah and Hashem hates this kind of people who can reach such a low point that for them, another human being with emotions, with a family, is nothing more than a piece of property that you can sell, separate from the family, cut his future, make him miserable for his entire life. The Torah cannot take it. And the Egyptians is a little bit different. You see, this is also something very, very beautiful. Rashi on the pasuk that you mentioned said, why you should not despise completely an Egyptian, because although they did terrible things to you, you have to still remember one thing: the time that you spend in Egypt, and if not Egypt at this place, you would die in hunger, in the famine. So here are the Jewish people, can separate two different things and to see even the good things in the bad things. So Egypt to us was a terrible experience. But with it, we don't forget the years that the Jewish people were in Egypt. They were successful in Egypt. Egypt welcomed them. And it's really interesting that Jewish history means, yes, you remember the bad part, but you are grateful for the good part, which I think is a magnificent idea. I don't know if I can contain it inside my heart, but the Torah wants us to contain it.
Do we do the same thing with ancient Rome?
Ancient Rome is slightly different, and I'll tell you why. Because we took so many things from ancient Rome. I can't tell you enough about it. This will require, maybe one day we should go to Rome to have,
A
a
mission.
series of podcasts about Rome and the Jewish people.
Or we'll
We
take some
took from
listeners
Rome,
with us. We'll have a mission.
we took from Rome so many things. And there is a very famous story about the scholars of Israel and a discussion about Rome at the time. So a person, one of the greatest sages, appears in the Talmud almost every page or two, Rabbi Yehuda. He said, look at the Romans. They are such a great nation. They build markets. They build bridges. They build beautiful roads all over. We should admire them. Another person was Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and he didn't want to say a word. He was very cautious. He didn't want to say good things. He didn't want to say bad things. And then there was a young guy there by the name Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You heard about him, right? All Lag Bomer is around Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And he said, how can you say something like this? They build roads. You know why they build roads? Because in beginning of every road, which, by the way, it's very true, if you have to Sacra Appia road in Rome that goes from Rome to Bernardini on the southern port, they had booths to take taxes. And the Roman became very rich because everything that went on this road, people had to give 10%, 20%, depend on the time, depend on the year, and the product, obviously. He said, you are like excited about their markets? Go to the markets. You know what you have in the markets? Like you have buildings with prostitutes, which was true. And you are like excited about the markets, and markets were like amazing. Think about like the farmers that before had to, sell privately and sometimes don't sell anything. You come to the market, like everything was sold. But Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai looked into things. And the same he said about everything that the Roman did. They just did it for themselves and for like the materialistic benefits. Don't think so highly about them. By the way, when the Romans heard about it, guess what happened to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? He had to go and to cover himself in a cave for 13 years. You can understand why now. And the whole story of Bar Kokhba. But what I want to tell you is that there are indeed, even regarding the Romans, who oppressed the Jews in unbelievable way, to the point where many Jews had to leave to Babylonian and to develop the Babylonian Talmud. But they brought to the world lots of bracha. They brought to the world like innovation and many, many things that were not before. So Chachamim saw it, like one eye saw the beauty that the Romans brought to the world, but the other eye saw the moral decay of the Romans. So as we said last time, you can be like unbelievable in terms of the contribution to bring to the world, like Wagner, but at the same time to be evil beyond description.
The series is called Parsha and Prose. Today we are talking about Ki Tetze, Parsha's Ki Tetze, through the lens of A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway, of which we discussed at the beginning of the podcast. Again, it's sponsored by the Professional Center. And if you need more information about the Professional Center, just take a look at their website. You can see it at the bottom of my screen. You can rent out space for a day, for a week, for a month. It's a wonderful place. And in the future, we'll be showing you pictures of some of their office spaces. Stunningly gorgeous. Now, Rabbi, in terms of romance that happens during war, which Hemingway was talking about, there are a few movies which actually speak to that. One of them is Casablanca. The other is 2001, Enemy at the Gates. 1996, an award-winning film, The English Patient. I'm sure you've seen it. And, of course, A Farewell to Arms, and also The Bridges at Toko Ri, 1954. So it is a theme that writers will often look at because of the fascination of it. On one hand, there is nothing worse than war. I have not been at war. You have seen some of it. I know that you've lost some friends in war, and I'm so sorry for that. But then the idea that within such an environment, you can find love, the two seem anathema to one another, yet it happens. And it's very almost curious. It's strange that one could fall in love when they're surrounded by such destruction and such cruelty. How might that happen?
I think it's love can be a shelter from all of this because, the contribution of Hemingway is to show everyone how awful is the war and futile something sometimes, and all the romance around war and the glory around war are just empty words. At the end of the day, as Frederick noticed, um, what is true about it? What is real about it? And think about like a soldier that start to think about the meaning of life, the vulnerability of life. He see people like die on the right, on the left, and by the way, Hemingway himself suffered from injuries. What he described about Frederick is something that he himself went through, and here you find like an island of a tranquility of something that is meaningful. So I do believe that actually it quite normal for a thinker, for a person who really look for some stability, for some meaning in life, to fall in love, despite or maybe because of all the crazy things that happening in war. I can tell you, my friends, when we came back from the yeshiva after the first Lebanon war, everyone was under the chuppah within few months.
Yeah.
Everyone.
It happened after October 7th as well. Many babies, more babies than ever, have been born after October 7th.
Yeah.
Now, Rabbi, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say one thing. You talked before about the suicide that he committed. Think about the end of this story. This story actually ended in a terrible way when
Yes.
Catherine and her child
Yes.
died. And by the way, you see again, the description is so emotionless, like it moves your heart, no questions about it, like to read about it, but the words, the description, lack any emotional depth. And think about the end of Hemingway life. That's what I said. Like it's a prediction of what is going to happen to him. The rich life that he had and everything that he went through are going to end up with something so dark and what look to us very meaningless.
I think you're right. And I'm thinking about The Old Man and the Sea, probably his most well-respected and well-read book. Also, very sad story.
Very, very. And again, what it brought me to think about, and I think you raised this point before, think about the story of the Akedah, okay? The Akedah is the most unbelievable story. I'm not talking about like to understand it, but a father and the son are going together where the father is, at least upon what he thinks, is going to sacrifice his son. Like you don't get it crazier than that. Do you see any emotion in the story? Garnish, nothing. You have nothing there. And therefore, I say, wow. So the first minimalist writing is actually not Hemingway, it's the Torah itself. And indeed, the Midrash comes many, many times and he tells us the real story behind the words. Do you think that Abraham just, got a command to take your son and to bring him as a sacrifice, the son that was born when he was 100 years old and he's going with no question, with no emotions? That's the job of the Midrash. And what Hemingway wants is that you are going to be the midrash. You are going to uncover the emotional side of the story. And this was very innovative at the time. And that's, as I said before, was the reason that he was recognized as a milestone in literature because he developed a new way of writing stories. And he got the Nobel Prize.
I want to use your example of the Akedah, which is Abraham taking his son Isaac to be offered to God. I want to use that as a segue for my next question to you. There's a couple of points within the Parsha I think that we should deal with. The first one is the Torah. I'll read the Torah. It says, if a man will have a wayward and rebellious son, one who does not hearken to the voice of his father and the voice of his mother, and they discipline him, but he does not hearken to them, then his father and mother shall grasp him and take him to the elders of the city and the gates of the place. Now listen to this. They shall say to the elders of the city, this son of ours is wayward and rebellious. He does not hearken to our voices. He is a glutton and he is a drunkard. All the men of the city shall pelt him with stones, and he shall die. And you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear, and they shall fear. Boy, oh boy, Rabbi, what's the Torah telling us that these parents who have such tzuras with their child, with their boy who's not listening to them, he's a glutton, he's a drunkard. What do? They take him to the elders, they turn him over, and they stone him to death. My gosh, what are the emotions within that?
So let's start from the end. You know, Chachamim say that this story never happened.
Yeah.
And the reason why the Torah wrote it is like Dil Torah or Adira. The Torah wants us to talk about things that never happened, just to try to understand the logic behind it. So, according to most of our sages, this story is just an awful story that never happened. But I would say, as I said many, many times, like any literature, sometimes the best stories are true stories that never happened. I think that Torah here want to tell us as parents a great lesson, a great lesson. And you know, just give me one comment before. Our sages and see the power of midrash. Say, look at the context. After I told you the story about the girl that you fall in love with and you took her home, the next story is about this child. There is no connection between the story, right? Because each one is a standalone. But the Torah says, the Midrash, the Chachamim say, no, 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 no. The author of the Torah wanted to teach you something in the context. You fell in love in the middle of a war with a girl that actually does not suit you. Her culture is very different. Maybe she worshipped Avodah Zarah. What do you think are going to be the results of something like this? A shidduch like this. Ben Sorer Umore. You are going to get a rebellious son. So it's very interesting how sometimes the Midrash does not even see it in the story, but he see it in the context of two different stories, which is very interesting. But I want to say one thing. And maybe the story of Ben Sorer Umore is the most important today. Okay, it never happened because even the requirement, by the way, are impossible. It says that the father and the mother has to be the same height and the same voice and the same sound. And how many parents will take their child, you know, just because he stole a few dollars and had like a nice party with his friend, will take him to the gates of the city and stone him? Between me and you, Avram, you can see it. I don't. I will say, I don't see it. But the Torah talking here about a principle. Because as I always tell my students in Talmud, listen, you read like the most crazy stories that never happened. But our sages, following the Torah, live in a bubble. They live in a lab. You know, in a lab, you do all kinds of crazy stories like atoms. I visited the CERN institution in Switzerland. You know, you take with investment of billions, you try to collide little atoms, something that maybe don't happen in nature at all. Why do you learn it? Like hundreds of scientists. The answer is sometimes in the lab you learn about the principle that will well serve you in real life. That's the beauty of lab. You do all kinds of experiments that you don't need for your life, but eventually it will translate itself to a case in your life. So the story of Ben Sorel Umore to me is like the lab of the Torah. Like it's imagine what can be or something like this. Like it's a thought exercise, which means as parents sometimes we think that we help our kids by giving them another thing. We don't draw a clear line, and the Torah is telling us, listen, it's going to end very, very bad. You think that like stealing is nothing, drinking is nothing. Today, instead of drinking, maybe you will use drugs or whatever it is. And the Torah said it might end very, very bad to the point that maybe you would prefer, and to me, it's worse than stoning. You would prefer that this child would not be born. And I can tell you, and I'm sure that you know people like this, that in hindsight, they saw what happened to their children and they said, I'm sorry that I brought him to this world. You don't have to stone your son in order to regret what became of him or of her. You go in some streets of New York City, you go in Philadelphia, you go to all these places, and what you get, it's like terrible sights to see young people that their life worth nothing and they will never recover from it. The brain is already like dead. And the Torah is telling us this is a Ben Sorer Umore. It not start one day he decide to start using heroin or other drugs. It's a process. And if you as a parent not going to watch it, it will end up very, very bad. That's how I read the Torah. Maybe other people read it differently. To me, that's the right reading of the Torah.
I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago that our family just went through a parole hearing for the fellow who murdered my brother-in-law, David Rosensweig.
Which I remember, and I was in his funeral. It was a shocking experience to the entire Jewish community here in Toronto.
Well, I must tell you that you and your family were very helpful with my nephews and niece in terms of, embracing them and showing them much love. They loved coming to your home. But the reason I tell you this is because the fellow who murdered our dear David, he was adopted. And after a few years, the adoptive parents returned him to the agency. He was in 25 foster homes, 25, I think by the time he was 12 years old. Now, we were very happy that he was denied parole. That's what we wanted. But when you look at him and you're talking about Ben Sora Mora, where a parent would say, I regret bringing this person into the world. And I'm thinking, who would say such a thing? Maybe that's the guy. Now, Rabbi, I'm always very taken by the beauty of the Torah, by God's clear understanding, if you will, of human behavior, and sometimes the sweetness of it. And I'll give you an example. In Parak 23, line 25, it says that when you come into the vineyard of your fellow, you can eat the grapes, as is your desire to your fill, but you may not put them into your vessel. And I just did a little research into that, and generally it's talking about a fellow who works in a vineyard for somebody, and while he works, he can eat. It's okay for him to eat, but he can't take a big basket and carry it home for his family, right? And I thought that was very sweet and very lovely. What's your take on that?
I think it's a very beautiful pasuk that actually brings us to the parsha of Yefat Toar. Listen, what do we have? What is the story with this guy who is going to war and fall in love with a lady, and then you have like a set of rules what he has to do. He has to take her, she has to shave her head, she has to wait to take off the beautiful clothes that she had, and
Mourn
to
her
sit
mother
there
and
ugly
father.
and remote. What the Torah is doing here, she takes the natural desire of a soldier, and until this very day, and we know what happened on October 7th, one of the trophies of the warrior are the girls of the enemy. This happened in all generations. You hear it in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Terrible, terrible stories, but nothing new in this world. And the Torah said, stop there. I do recognize that when a person is going to a war where the entire order is in a total chaos, all the dark side of a person might surface. But I will tell you what to do with it. I will tell you how to restrain this. And this is the beauty of the Torah, not a denial and to say, how can you just leave her alone, don't touch her. The Torah recognizes our desires and the situation, the special situation that we are in. The Torah said, restrain yourself. With all this, there is a process here you have to go through. So that the Torah does not fight in any way our desires, but she restrain them and channel them to a positive outcome as much as they can. The Torah does not like the whole story about Yefat Toar, but she recognized what happened in a wartime to a soldier. Here is another example. A person go to a vineyard and you see the beautiful cluster of grapes. And I know that because we bought the house from Italian guy who has two beautiful, and it's still like producing every year, beautiful grapes. He left me like two trees of grapes. And you go under the tree and you really want to eat it. It's like sweet, it's beautiful. And the Torah does not say, hey, it's not yours. The Torah recognizes the fact that as a worker, you are there, it's just like a meter from you. The Torah says you can eat it. But here the Torah restrains. I know that you have a basket there. I know that you have like big pockets on your working suit. Don't put anything there. For you, it's one thing. Your family, it's stealing from the person who gave you this job. And this is very unfair and unjust. So I see lots of the laws in this parsha are recognizing our weaknesses and to teach us how we can deal with it to a positive outcome.
That's lovely. That's a very lovely comparison. I like that very much. Very much.
Thank you.
Rabbi, in conclusion, there is a sugya within the Torah that I've always been taken by, and that is called Kansipur or Shluach HaKen. Is it Shluach HaKen or Shluach HaKan?
Shluach HaKen, Shluach HaKan, it's the same thing. It's like let the mother fly away before you take the eggs or the chicks.
Yeah.
You tell about it.
So let me tell you quickly about it. The Torah says like this. If a bird's nest happens to be before you on the road, and there's all kinds of discussions about this in the Talmud. What do you mean happens to be by you? Some people say that you should actually go out and look for it, but that's another discussion. Or any tree on the ground, young birds or eggs, and the mother is roosting on the young birds or the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely send away the mother and take away the young for yourself, so that it will be good for you and you will prolong your days. So a couple of things. Firstly, I remember learning this in yeshiva, and if I'm not mistaken, either it's Rosh or Tosa says, don't think that the Torah is telling you this to save the feelings of the bird. It's what we call a chuk, a statute. God tells you to do it, therefore you do it, and it has nothing to do with your feelings for that animal. Then the Torah goes on to say that if you do this, you get a richat yamim. And there's only two places in the entire Torah where you get a richat yamim, length of days. One is kibbud aviyim, where you respect your mother and father, and the second is shluach haken or shluach hakan. So my questions for you is, number one is, what's the whole thing behind shluach haken? Why then am I supposed to shoo away the mother birds to take the eggs, if not for the feelings of the bird? And why a richat yamim? Why do I get length of days for it?
I'm not sure that I have a good answer for the second one, but I really want to talk with you, especially in light of what happened in October 7th, and what happened in the Holocaust and what happened to many communities over the years. You think about like a bird and the chicks, and you think about like the terrorists going into a family's home and killing the children in front of the parents. Can you think about something more awful than that? And here the Torah is telling us what should be our feeling, not towards another person, but just towards a bird, her eggs, her chicks. I wish that, the non-Jewish world just will learn this parsha, because maybe so many more Jews would be spared from awful, awful people who killed families together with no mercy, with sometimes even to joy to do things like this. So this is one comment I have, but I want to say something very, very interesting about it, because I also thought, well, do you see the connection between kibud Av V'em, like respecting your parents, and the story of the bird? Both of them are talking about parenthood. Think about it. Your parents, obviously, and this bird who is sitting on the eggs or the chicks, the little chicks. Now, there is something here which is very profound, and I repeat it, I try to repeat it every year to my students. What is happening here? The mother has this power, and every mother has it, to protect their children. The mother wants to provide them and support them with life. The person comes and he said, actually, this is great, because she loves her children so much, she's not going to be separate from them, and I will take the eggs and her together. So you use the parenting feeling of this bird against her. So God gave us such a powerful feeling to protect, to do everything, to sacrifice ourselves sometimes for our children. You take this holy power and you use it against a parent? That's impossible. A person who can do something like this does not deserve long life. But if you understand what does it mean not to use the natural power that God gave for the goodness, for the good, for the better, and you use them for yourself, then you deserve long life, because you understand the secret of creation, that everything that was created came to serve you, to serve others, and you're part of it. And with parents, it's quite clear that, what our parents will not do for us. What? Everything. In every normal family, the feeling of parents to their kids, the way they are going to protect them, to do everything for them. Sometimes we don't recognize it afterwards. It's understand these powers that Hashem gave to every parent, every father, every mother. I think if you recognize it, your life are going to be longer, because they are going to be, I don't know if it's the days you are going to live from 80 to 85 or from 85 to 90, but I can tell you one thing. Your 24 hours are going to stretch to 50 hours, because it's not going to be only about you. In your time, you are going to extend life for others too. Ya'arichun yamecha means they will be stretched. They will be much more meaningful and influence and impact more people. That's the way I read the Torah.
I heard a Devar Torah like that once, pretty exactly. Like if you say Arichat Yamim in the Torah, in the Talmud, there is a Agarata. There's a story about a man who sees a little boy go up a tree, and to do Shluch Haken, he falls out of the tree and he dies. And of course, the question is, the Torah says you get a Richat Yamim for both those things. So there are many different answers. One answer is pretty much like you're saying. It's the idea that your days will be lengthy. And what does that mean? They will be meaningful and they will have purpose, because you recognize that energy of life from a mother to a child, from a bird to its eggs. And I think that's a very, very poignant piece, and something that we should always carry with us. Rabbi, I want to thank you for a beautiful, beautiful podcast. I think some of the points that you made were exquisite, and I'm certain that our listeners and our viewers will take something very, very important out of this. And I want to repeat that it is so important that when you study Torah with us or anybody, there are many, many shiurim and classes online. There are more Torah being taught today than ever before in the history of the Jewish people. Consider what the Torah wants us to do in terms of human behavior. Consider what it means to you that when you go into a vineyard, a metaphorical vineyard, it's okay to eat the grapes, but it's not okay to take them home in a basket. How do you apply that to your life? And then take it to the next stage, which is, my God, we have such a beautiful blueprint for truth. It is so exquisite and allows us so much breadth in terms of our own character and our personality. How much prouder could you be as a Jew, as a human being, to have this book, to have the Torah in front of you? You know, I was surfing this week, and I went into it's called Sefaria.org. Sefaria, is it?
Sefaria, yeah.
Sefaria. It's a compendium of all the great Jewish books. And I had never really studied Hasidus. So I decided to go on for a little bit and study Rav Nachman Breslov. And just in the first 2 or 3 lines where he talked about the sisterhood between faith, Eretz Yisrael, truth, the Torah, that they're all combined into one, I thought, what a beautiful concept that is. How lovely. I never really thought about the sisterhood of those ideas and those truths. So we have it all in front of us. And I think we're very blessed to. I agree with that, Rabbi.
Absolutely. And you say something about imagination. I say, just open the Torah, open any Torah source, and let your brain and thoughts just to try to grasp what's the story here, what this text came to teach me, because the people who wrote every word, they wanted to teach us something. But, like any other teacher, the students has to listen. And what I find many, many times, even by great learners, they learn the words, they are very knowledgeable about many, many things, but they never open their heart to listen to the true story, to the true message of what's going on here. So, yes, a person who loves to read, and I think that many of our listeners love to read. You know why we love to read? Because we can identify with it. We feel that we identify or completely don't respect certain figures in the story, but we think, we grasp, we feel. And I think people like this who read well, I would highly recommend them to start and opening the Torah on a constant basis and to read it in the same way. Like, open your heart, open your mind, open your soul. You are going to be much richer than you ever thought.
Yishkoch, Rabbi. We had a bit of a hard week in Eretz Yisrael the last couple of days. We've lost a few chayelim and some soldiers and some citizens to terrorist attacks. And of course, our soldiers are still there. Looks like for a moment we lost the rabbi. Hopefully we'll get him back. In that light, I'd like to read a prayer for the hostages. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless, preserve, and protect the captives and missing soldiers of the citizens of Israel and the Israel Defense Forces. May God rescue them from captivity and speedily restore them in peace, and in the merit of the prayers of this holy congregation who pray for them. May the Holy One, blessed be God, show them mercy, increase their strength, remove their pain, and send them a recovery of body and spirit. May God return them to the bosom of their family swiftly and soon. And let us all say amen.
Amen.
And I'd just like to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that our podcasts are picking up speed and our numbers are growing both within Parsha and Prose and the other podcasts that I do. The podcast requires financial support. It's always important to keep things going and doing in a productive way and with good technology, and that costs money. So I would ask you, please, that if you're interested in sponsoring the show, please be in touch with me at avrum.rosensweig@gmail.com. We'll have a schmooze, we'll have a talk, and we'll see what works for you. Rabbi, until next week, do you have some closing words?
I just hope to better news from Israel, and what can I tell you? We are through difficult times. There is a beautiful a part of a piyut that we said in before Rosh Hashanah. תכלה שנה וקללותיה, תחל שנה וברכותיה. The last year, with all its curses, should end and should start like a new year with all the blessings. I really hope for this, that, all the curses of last year will just be something that will give us power to grow from it, and we will forget about them very, very soon.
Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching and for listening. We had a great time with you, and we hope you take something special out of it. Until next week, as they say in the vernacular in Yiddish, sei gesund, go in peace, and the Jewish people should be healthy, and there should be peace for us and for all the world.
Amen.